For anyone who wants to build their own computer, there are two major questions. What parts should I build with, and how do I build it? And I have a playlist with lots of videos answering those questions, especially for beginners. This video is not about those first two questions though, it's about the third one that comes up after you put the system together, which is, what do I do now?
Excellent!
Today's video is brought to you by Thermaltake's View 380 XL tempered glass ARGB mid-tower chassis with an innovative dual chamber design and angled front intake to direct airflow towards components, keeping even power-hungry high-end PC builds cool while maintaining an unobstructed view. Hey, that's why it's called the View 380. Keep things clean with hidden connector motherboard support, keep cool with 4 included ARGB fans and multiple radiator mount locations for up to 360mm AIOs, and have fun building with plenty of room for cable management and added storage. For more on the View 380 XLTG ARGB from Thermaltake, click the sponsor link in the video description. So today I'm going to walk you through setting up a new PC that you've just assembled for the first time, but this equally applies to rehabilitating a system because a fresh Windows installation is a great way to clear out the clutter from an old build and sort of start fresh as well. So real quick, if you're still in the build prep phase, check out my playlist where I have my most recent how to build a gaming PC tutorial posted just a couple weeks ago. And then this video on how to set up a new gaming PC is still very relevant. There's only a couple small changes to the Windows installation process that I'm going to show you guys today. But for further details and some more tweaks and system setup recommendations, definitely check out that video too. So first, let's run down the things you'll need for this tutorial. Your newly built PC, of course, which I'm assuming you've done at least a test boot on to make sure it's actually powering up and functioning. You'll need peripherals to connect to and control your PC, which is a mouse and a keyboard, as well as a monitor, which typically plugs in with an HDMI or DisplayPort plug. I have a monitor that's just off camera right over there for this system. You will also need Windows 11 installation media. For that, you'll need an 8 gig or larger flash drive, as well as an internet connection and another computer in order to create the USB installer. After we use the other computer to create our USB Windows 11 installer, we will use that to install Windows onto the new computer, and then it will be able to boot up and run by itself without the installer. And then at that point, we'll want to connect the new computer to the internet, either by plugging in an Ethernet or RJ45 cable over to your router, or by connecting via Wi-Fi if your motherboard has built-in Wi-Fi, and if it doesn't and you need Wi-Fi, don't worry, because a USB Wi-Fi adapter is typically only about $10 to $20. The last thing I'd recommend taking note of and keeping in mind is what motherboard you have installed in your new computer. In this system, we're running the B650M Project Zero motherboard from MSI, because you will want to access your motherboard manufacturer's support page for your motherboard in order to download a few important things. But let's start out by using our existing computer to make a Windows 11 installer with our flash drive. So I'm going to plug my flash drive into this system. And it's worth noting that when you create the Windows 11 installer, it's going to wipe everything on the flash drive, so make sure you don't have any important information stored on there. My flash drive is currently empty. And we're going to head over to the Windows 11 Installation Assistant website, which I will link in the video's description. And here is the first introduction to something we're going to be met with a lot in today's video, which is Microsoft trying to get us to use Microsoft services that we might not necessarily want to use, such as Copilot. Do you want Copilot? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I don't, so no thanks, Microsoft. Let's scroll down past the Installation Assistant, which is more meant for in-place upgrades, to this second entry, which is Create Windows 11 Installation Media, and we're going to click Download Now. That downloaded the media creation tool to my Downloads folder, and I'm going to go ahead and run that, and I will have to click Yes as Windows says, are you sure you want to run this? Next, we scroll through and thoroughly read our applicable notices and license terms and accept them. Then Windows will get a few things ready. There are some language and edition options. You can uncheck this box if you need to change those, but we do not. And we will be making a USB flash drive media installer, so we'll select that option. And then here you might have multiple drives listed, so make sure you choose the right one. I only have a single USB drive connected, so that's the one I'm going to select. And then we'll take a few moments to download Windows 11 so it can plop it onto that USB. After a bit of a wait, which might vary depending on the speed of your internet and your USB drive, it will say your USB flash drive is ready, and we'll click Finish. And setup will clean up and delete stuff that it downloaded. I like to rename the USB, just so I know what it is, to Win11 USB, so I know it's an installer. And since you should still have some more space on the drive, I'm going to do one thing here that's going to be a quick little shortcut to help us get connected to the internet after Windows is installed. Your motherboard should have at least one networking device by default, either a hardwired RJ45 jack for Ethernet, and then it will often have Wi-Fi as well. The Windows installation media only has drivers for a certain number of networking devices, so Windows may or may not recognize your network devices when you first install Windows, which makes it kind of difficult to connect to the internet to update the system with the latest drivers and Windows updates and everything. To get a functional driver, just head over to your motherboard manufacturer's page for your specific motherboard, and do note that some motherboards have revisions, so you want to make sure you're accessing the support page for the right one. Also note that depending on your motherboard manufacturer, MSI, Gigabyte, Asus, ASRock, and so on, you might have a different look for the support web page, but you should have access to a drivers and downloads section. In my other setup tutorial, I downloaded the latest BIOS and walked through installation of that as well. I'm going to skip that for the sake of brevity today and just focus on the driver that we need to access the internet. But definitely check out that video if you want a walkthrough for updating your motherboard BIOS as well, also known as UEFI. Under the driver section, we've selected Windows 11 64-bit because that's the operating system we're installing. And we are going to need to come back to this page to download stuff like chipset drivers, but for now we're just looking for LAN, local area network. And here we have Bluetooth drivers, Wi-Fi drivers, as well as Realtek PCIe Ethernet drivers. That is the one we want. So I'm just going to make a new folder on our Windows 11 USB called MSI B650M Project 0, our motherboard name. And since this came in a zipped package, I'll go ahead and open that, grab the folder, and we'll extract it to our USB drive. And now if the new Windows 11 installation doesn't recognize our network adapter, we will have the driver ready to go to install. From there, I will go ahead and eject the newly created USB, and we can at last switch over to setting up our newly built computer. So back here on the motherboard's rear I/O, I'm going to go ahead and plug in our USB connectors for our keyboard and mouse. Also the HDMI cable coming over from my monitor, which I'm going to plug into the graphics card's video outs. You will often have video outs on the motherboard as well. It's best to plug directly into the graphics card if you have a discrete graphics card installed. That said, for CPUs that have integrated graphics, which enables the video outs on the motherboard I/O, I definitely had situations where it did not default to sending the video out through the discrete graphics card. So if you're not getting a video signal, try switching to your motherboard's video out, because that is a simple bit of troubleshooting that can get past a no video out issue, which can be a bit frustrating. I'm also going to go ahead and plug our USB drive in. That's the Windows 11 USB installer that we just created. And then of course we also need power. So here's our AC power cable from our power supply routed over to the wall, which I'm going to plug in back here, and then also make sure the switch is switched on. The line is on, the O is off. And now we can go ahead and power on this system, which should happen momentarily. The motherboard by default is going to reach out to the connected drives in the system and ask, is there an operating system anywhere? If there is, it will go and boot off of that drive. If it can't find a drive with an operating system, it might reach out to your USB drives and automatically boot off of the new USB Windows installer that you just created. But it doesn't always do that, so here's how to manually tell the motherboard where to boot from. Basically, as the motherboard is booting up, it goes through a process called post or power on self-test, and during this process, it should display on your monitor a splash screen, and that splash screen will likely say somewhere, press delete to enter setup, or enter UEFI, or enter the BIOS. The safest way to make sure you get into the UEFI or BIOS is just to start your system up and start tapping delete every second or two. If your keyboard lights up, when the keyboard lights up, that usually means the keyboard is now active, and that's an indication to start trying to press delete. And here we are, we've accessed our UEFI or BIOS, basic input-output system, and most UEFI interfaces have an easy mode these days, which gives you a quick at-a-glance look at things like your CPU speed, what CPU is installed, what your BIOS version is, some temperature information. And look, very conveniently here, since it's something that a lot of people will need to access, especially on the first time setup, we have a boot priority list, which is just drag and drop with the mouse. We want to boot off of the USB in UEFI mode, so I'm going to take that and I'm going to drag it to the front of the list. And then I'm going to hit F10, which is pretty universally the save and exit key in most of the BIOSes that I have worked with. But it will often even show you the changes to the configuration you've made, which was that I rearranged the boot priority. Now after I click yes, the system will reboot and it will go to the USB and try to boot off of that. Incidentally, this system already had a Windows installation on it, so what I'm showing you guys right now is kind of a reformatting process, but it's pretty much the same if you're doing a new and fresh installation of Windows as well. Also, there's a backup method to boot off of your USB drive, which is to do a quick boot menu, which a lot of motherboards have by pressing, usually it's F11 or F12, the same way you'd press delete upon boot up. That will allow you to manually select the boot device, and here we're going to choose our UEFI drive. And at last we've booted off the USB and we can start going through this installation process by selecting our languages, our keyboard and input method. Do note that the Windows installer USB can operate as a repair device as well, so if you have a corrupted installation, you can boot off of the USB and try some repair options too. We're going to install. We need to agree that everything on the drive we're installing to is going to be deleted, including all files and apps. And here we could input a product key if you had one available. You can also do that after the installation process is completed. So I'm going to choose I don't have a product key for now, and we'll have another short wait. And then we can select which version of Windows 11 we're planning to install. For most people, this is either going to be Windows 11 Home or Windows 11 Pro. If you already have a Windows 11 license key, then definitely install the version for the key that you already have. I prefer Windows 11 Pro, so I'm going to go ahead and install that. I will once again read all of these terms and accept them. And then the installer will look at the drives you have attached and give you a list of them. Physical drives are listed with a number. I actually have 3 different drives connected to this system right now. I have an unformatted 4 terabyte drive, that's disk 0. I have disk 1 that has an existing Windows installation on it, so that disk has been partitioned out into 5 different partitions. And then I have disk 2 listed, which is the Windows 11 USB installer that we just booted off of. If you just built your system, likely you will just have an unallocated space disk listed here, and you can just select that and press next. If you're installing to a drive that's already been used, or you're trying to do a fresh install of Windows and delete everything, then you will need to delete the existing partitions first. To do that, we just select each partition and select delete. Sometimes it might take a moment. We'll do them one at a time. It's a good time to remind you that this will delete everything off of this drive, and you shouldn't be doing this on a drive that you have any important data stored to. And now that we deleted all the partitions, we have disk 1 unallocated space with 2 terabytes available, and I'm going to click next on that one. You can also manually set up partitions if you want, but if you just click next, it will automatically set up the partitions for you using the maximum amount of space on the drive. The updated installer gives you one last prompt recapping what you've chosen to do. Install Windows 11, keep nothing, yes. And now once again we can take a short break, usually just 5 to 10 minutes, while this goes through installing Windows from the USB onto the drive on our system. So after that initial installation and copying of files, as it should hopefully indicate on your screen, the system might restart a few different times and it should give you a progress bar to get to 100% completion, at which point the system should restart and bring you into this, which is the Windows setup environment. Now it can happen that when the system reboots, it can go back and try to boot off of your USB installer. Once again, one way to get around that is to just unplug it after all the data is copied. This doesn't need to be plugged in anymore, or you can go back into the UEFI like I showed you before and drag your boot sequence back into the proper order. Instead of booting off of the UEFI USB, it should now be booting off of the UEFI hard drive, even though technically it's a solid state drive. But let's go through this process. Choose your country, choose your keyboard layout. Do you want to add a second keyboard? I don't, so I'll skip that. And now we've come to the crucial part of the Windows 11 installation, which is part of the reason I'm making this video, because Microsoft has changed this a little bit recently. Windows wants to connect to the internet and have you sign in with your Microsoft account so that Windows can track you and send telemetry data back to Microsoft, which they benefit from, which personally I'd rather not do if I can opt out of it. I'd rather install Windows to this machine rather than having my Windows tied to my Microsoft account. But this is part of the reason I did not tell you to plug in your Ethernet cable or connect to your internet yet. On the plus side, I have Ethernet listed here, which means Windows was able to default recognize my network device. If you didn't have any devices listed here, you could choose Install Driver, and then you could plug in your USB and direct it to the driver that we downloaded earlier. But what I'm going to show you guys right now is how to work around this Microsoft account requirement using the new method, which hopefully Microsoft doesn't turn off anytime soon. I'm going to start by pressing Shift and F10. That brings up a command prompt. You'll want to click on this window to select it, and then you're going to type a command in right here, which I will also put in the video's description down below so you can make sure you type it in properly. That command is start space ms-cxh local only, and then press enter. That brings up this lovely interface where you can create a local user account for this computer that's not tied to a Microsoft account, providing Microsoft with more telemetry data on your system usage. So here you can just put in your name or a name for the computer or whatever the heck you want it to be. I'm just going to use Paul for now. And then I do recommend using a password to keep your computer secure. For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to skip that for now, but please, use a password on your computer, it's important. And then Windows says hi and getting things ready for you, and we'll have another short wait until we can actually I was about to say start using Windows, but there's a few more things we need to select. This is privacy settings, and here is again where you're giving Microsoft more permission to track you in various ways. Feel free to read through these and determine if any of them might actually be useful for you. Some of them actually are, but again, it is giving Microsoft permission to get some information from you that they might not have access to otherwise. The one I think is maybe most useful is Find My Device, but that's a little bit more useful for portable computers like laptops. But all right, we selected Accept, and now we have Windows installed. There it is. Look at all these empty icons places. Okay, I'm gonna take you through some very basic low-level setup steps right here, but again, I recommend my other video if you want a few more details on getting things set up. Starting off with personalization in the settings menu, because there's a couple things that irritate me. Like, I like the taskbar to be on the left side. It's just personal preference. You can also turn certain icons on or off here, like widgets. Maybe you use widgets and they're useful, or maybe you don't and you want to turn it off. Also, in File Explorer, I like to go to the options. I set Open File Explorer to this PC, and I go to View, and I turn on Display Full Path, Show Hidden Files, and don't hide empty drives or extensions. This one in particular, hide extensions for known file types, I always turn off because I want to know what kind of files I'm dealing with. Now, I happen to know from that setup utility that Windows is recognizing our local area network, or our network adapter. If it wasn't though, I would plug my USB drive back in and go into it, and then I would probably run the installer for the driver that we downloaded, which is going to be setup.exe. See why I turned on Show File Extensions? I want to know which one the executable is. Since my network adapter was recognized though, I'm just going to go ahead and plug in my Ethernet cable over to the router. And then we can see in the bottom corner here that just popped up with network and internet access. To round things out for this video, I have 4 more things I think you should do. And then of course, check out my other video if you want some more details on setup procedures. Oh, but those, oh, look, my screen's flashing. I connected to the internet, and now Windows is doing Windows updates in the background. I didn't even have to tell it to. It just started doing that. Because when your computer is connected to the internet, it starts downloading and updating things for you. But those are the 4 things we're going to do. Run Windows Update, possibly multiple times, possibly through multiple restarts until there are no more Windows updates left to update. We're going to install our motherboard's chipset driver, the latest, most up-to-date one. Windows Update might install one of those, but usually there's a more up-to-date one available from the motherboard manufacturer's website. We're going to install our GPU or graphics card driver so we can game, and then we're going to install Steam so we can game. So for Windows Update, you can just hit the Windows key and go to Settings, or you can type Update, and it should give you a Check for Updates link. And look, apparently we're up to date. I'm gonna click Check for Updates because even when it tells you you're up to date, you can often check for updates. And look, wow, suddenly it just did another, okay, it's doing something here because it just changed my resolution. Likely these are graphics drivers being installed in the background. But as you can see, it was lying to me initially. It did have lots of updates to install, and it's just going to keep going through these. Sometimes it will be like, oh, we couldn't do it, it needs to retry. This is why sometimes you need to do a restart, go back to Windows Update, tell it to check again. But anyway, we can keep doing that in the background. I'm going to go ahead and access the internet. Of course, we have Edge installed as our internet browser by default. I'm not a huge fan of Edge. It's not as bad as it used to be. But it does kind of force you through this setup process initially, like make your Microsoft experience more useful. Give Microsoft permission to gather more data on your browsing habits. No. Right, so I know I said I was just going to do 4 things, but I gotta get Firefox. If you have a computer, a desktop computer, and you want to browse the internet, and you want to run an ad blocker that's actually functional, Firefox is pretty much your best option right now. Because Firefox plus uBlock Origin is the easiest and most accessible solution for that doesn't involve getting into stuff that's a little bit more technical. Pin to taskbar, set as default browser. We don't need to import anything from the previous thing. Yes. Boom. Here's another thing that might pop up when you connect to the internet. Because of the advances with UEFI technology and how Windows works, you will now have pop-ups that prompt you to install drivers for certain hardware that you might have connected. I don't always recommend following these pop-ups because it usually wants you to install like some utility that often is a lot more bloated than what you actually need. I'm just going to cancel that. Wow, they're even threatening you. We recommend using the tool. No, cancel. So the most important driver that you will want to install on your system is the chipset driver, which is a pretty important part of the motherboard. So we're going back to our B650M Project Zero motherboard website. And you probably remember this, drivers and downloads. We want the driver option. And we want system and chipset drivers, and there should be one relatively recent. This one's from January, so we'll download that. And if we head over to our downloads folder, we can see this zip file that just downloaded. I'm just going to drag that over to the desktop so it can decompress, so it can be installed. And when it comes to installing drivers, especially fundamental ones like these, I recommend not overlapping installations. So if Windows Update is in the middle of updating, go ahead and let it finish before you install your chipset driver. And there's always these dilemmas, like it says it's 81% installing here, but it also says restart now. Should I let that keep going, or should I hit restart now? Oh, it went to 93, I think I'll wait. Okay, now we're ready for a restart, so I'll go ahead and do that. And then once we restart, we'll do the chipset driver. There we are with a successful reboot. So next up, we have the chipset software driver, which I copied over to the desktop, so I'll go ahead and install that. After checking out your hardware, AMD will give you these chipset drivers to install. You can go ahead and install all of them. If you're killing time while chipset drivers are installing, go ahead and hit the Windows button and type startup. That will let you access startup apps, because you might have apps on this list that you don't really use or that you don't really want. Like Microsoft Edge, we're going to be using Firefox, so I can go ahead and turn that off. Microsoft OneDrive, if you want Microsoft OneDrive for cloud storage, it is a solution for that. But if you don't use it, you don't really need it running in the background all the time and getting in the way of like your file explorer shortcuts and stuff like that. You can quit OneDrive directly from over here. Yeah, quit. But it's easier just to switch that off so it doesn't start up. Windows security, we'll leave that on. And now the chipset software installed, prompting us for another restart. If the system prompts you to restart, restart. That's the best rule of thumb. Okay, Windows Update, chipset driver, and graphics card driver. So if you're rocking an NVIDIA graphics card, you can go over to the NVIDIA driver download page. The system actually has a Radeon RX 7900 GRE. So for that, we'll head over to the AMD support page. You can download a little utility that will do it for you. I still like to manually search though and tell it exactly what card I'm using. 7900 GRE, submit, Windows 11 64-bit edition. And then it still gives you the auto detect and install at the top. But we're gonna get the latest Adrenaline Edition driver, which is 2.5.4.1. And we'll give another moment for that to download. While we're at it, since we're going to play some games on this gaming computer, let's go ahead and install Steam as well by downloading that little software package. And now we're back over here to our downloads folder to run the AMD Adrenaline Edition installer, which will also take just a few moments. Now here again, we have a driver that Windows Update installed for our graphics card. That's why we're able to do stuff like change the display resolution up to our max 4K and everything. But especially for graphics cards, you're just going to want to get the latest software for sure. Also note that you'll have additional options here, so you can do a factory reset, or you can do like a minimal or driver only install. Sticking with this video's theme of not providing these companies with more information than we have to, you can deselect that too if you want. And we can accept an express install, or we can choose the custom install option that will allow us to not install AMD Privacy View, because I'm still not totally sure what that does. Limits the ability of others nearby to fully see your screen. Tracks your eye movements using your webcam and reveals only part... Okay, we're not going to do that. Hey, and this is another funny thing. The chipset driver we just downloaded from MSI came out back in January. It's 70108.129. Because we're using an AMD platform though, the AM5 platform and an AMD Ryzen CPU, it's also gone and checked our driver version, and there's actually a chipset driver available that came out just in April. So it's going to update that too. That's convenient. That works for me. And again, we wait for the install to happen, screen may flicker, give it a few moments. And while we're giving that a few moments, we can do other stuff too, like, taskbar. Let's clean up our taskbar and get rid of stuff we don't want. Like the Microsoft Store, I might use it from time to time, but it doesn't need to be pinned there. Let's get rid of Edge, and then this, the Copilot. I don't like Copilot. All these AI services being like, hey, let AI help you. And they're really just like checking what you do with AI and gathering that information and using it to optimize AI even more. They should pay us for that. That's my opinion. Hurrah! All right, now it will launch the Adrenaline Edition interface if you want to take a look at that. You can also have it auto update if you want. I like to manually control my updates. That's a personal preference. Right, there it is. AMD Software Adrenaline Edition is installed, and I'm not going to make this a tutorial about using this software, so we'll minimize that for now, and it's installing our chipset driver update too. All right, first setup item is going to be Steam, so I'm just going to go ahead and install that real quick. It's got a pretty small installer because Steam updates itself pretty frequently, so every time you run Steam, it will often update Steam and download a new package. All right, and after logging into Steam, which is an important part with our two-factor authentication, And there we go. Now I have Steam, and of course you can use Steam to download and install any manner of free-to-play games. There's so many available on there. Or if you've already got a Steam library, you can now start downloading directly. Or you can check out a tutorial on copying Steam games from an existing device you already have if you want to save yourself on downloading a bunch of stuff. And it looks like that chipset driver update finished, so we'll do one more restart. And now we have rebooted once again, and that pretty much wraps up the tutorial here. Now Windows is probably going to start prompting you to activate Windows, which you can do if you have a product key, or add your Microsoft account, which you should continually tell it that you don't want to do. You might also note that your computer got a default name. You can also rename it here if you want it to be something that's more appropriate to what it actually is and recognizable versus this string of letters. But the last things I would do here would be to continue doing the thing I started doing earlier, and then I skipped to show you guys the rest of the steps, which is to keep doing updates, continue to retry and check for updates, and restart as many times as it takes. Usually it's only maybe 3 or 4 times before it gets all of them downloaded, especially if you just made a fresh Windows USB installer. And then lastly, press the Windows key and type Manage. Go to Computer Management. And here we can do a couple things. If you click on Device Manager, it's going to show you all the devices on your system. If there are any devices that aren't recognized by Windows that need drivers, if you have a fancy high-end motherboard that has extra bells and whistles, you might need to download extra drivers from your motherboard manufacturer's website to get those up and running. But those will be listed here with a little yellow triangle and an exclamation point on them, indicating that they're not ready to go. Likewise, if you have additional storage drives installed on the system besides just the drive that you installed Windows to, click on Disk Management. And if it is a brand new, never set up drive, you'll probably get a pop-up like this that says, hey, we just recognized a disk that's never been initialized. Do you want to initialize it? You can say OK and go ahead from here. Or if you don't get that pop-up, you can just right-click on that disk, which is disk 0 in this case. But if you right-click over here, you can go to Initialize Disk to bring up that dialog. You should go with GPT unless you really have need to take that drive and plug it into an older computer, because that's the only reason you want to go with MBR at this point. Then you'll have this big bunch of unallocated space. Right-click on that, click New Simple Volume, and follow the steps in this wizard to assign a drive letter and set up a partition on that drive with all the remaining space. And you can even name it something like what it is, a 4 terabyte SSD. Click Finish. And now you have your 4 terabyte SSD right there, ready to go next to the drive that we installed our operating system to. But there is one more really important thing for system setup that's a little bit more low level and fundamental that we haven't done yet, and that's enable the XMP settings for our memory. Sometimes you can do that right off the bat, but not all XMP settings are actually going to be stable. So to be safe, I usually like to get the system setup going, make sure everything's running without any issues before that. That way we know if we suddenly turn on XMP settings and we're getting hangs or that sort of thing in the operating system, it was probably the XMP settings that did it. So here's a trick to get back into the UEFI. Open up your Windows menu, go to the power button here. You're going to go to restart, but I'm going to hold down the shift button before I click restart. And that will take me to this menu, which lets you do multiple things, but restarting contextually, I think is kind of how it's called. If we go over to Troubleshoot and Advanced Options, we want to go to UEFI Firmware Settings. Also note that from here you can choose Startup Settings, and that will let you reboot into safe mode, which is really, really helpful for troubleshooting if you need to do that down the line. But I'm going to click UEFI Firmware Settings. That will boot straight into the UEFI BIOS environment that before we had to tap delete to get into. Some PCs start so fast that it's actually hard to get your delete tap in time there. So this is a great way to do it from Windows and make sure you get into the UEFI every time. So all we're going to do here is turn on our XMP. I'm switching back to easy mode because they have a button for it right here. All we do is click that button. Now XMP is enabled for our DDR4 3600 speed memory. Alternatively, in advanced mode, it's right here, the XMP profile, and you can choose that and go between disabled or profile 1. It's already loaded, so I'm just going to hit F10 to save and exit, and then we'll reboot back into Windows. And now the system is set up, good to go, ready for use to browse the internet, watch movies, play games, do any manner of things. And for you guys, if you're looking for a little bit more, some more details, a few extra things that I didn't cover today, check out my how to set up a PC tutorial video that's going to be linked in the description, and that has a few more details, a few more tweaks and tuning things that you might be interested in. But that wraps it up for this video, you guys. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've learned a little bit more. I hope if you had a computer that wasn't set up, it's now set up, and if you know anyone who's into PC building or just learning and you want to share this video with them, that's greatly appreciated. You can also help support my channel by getting yourself some high quality merchandise on my store. That's at paulshardware.net, where we have shirts, mugs, pint glasses, and all manner of high quality merch. If you did enjoy this video and you found it useful and you want to hit the thumbs up button, that is also super helpful for me. Thank you once again for watching, and we'll see you all in the next one.